For 2 weeks now, we have been watching the town of Gibson City recover from a 1,000-year flood. But someone with a very unique perspective on it is this guy sitting next to me, meteorologist Jacob Dickey, born and raised in Gibson City. And I think you would say that this is the hardest thing that town has ever gone through.
I would agree with that. You think of the Gibson City over the years, we've had windstorms, we've had minor flooding, but this by and large has been the most devastating event that the town has ever seen. And it's really been a event full of hurt and pain, but there's been a lot of good that's come from it too. And it's been something I don't think anyone in Gibson City ever thought would happen.
And you have covered hundreds of storms. For it to be happening to the place you love so much, how is it different, seeing it, being in the middle of it?
Yeah, I've been in hurricanes and I've been in tornadoes and seen floods, but it's never been, the people I love, the people that I grew up with, and seeing, it's hard seeing any devastation whatsoever. I think back to some of the events that I've covered over the years, and those were really tough for me, but this one's just even more tough in the way that the faces that are being impacted by the flooding, I grew up with those faces. Yeah. They're my teachers.
You know their names.
I know their names. Yeah. They and I are friends. We grew up together. It's something where I think even 2 weeks later, I'm still shocked and processing through it about how devastating it was, and then realizing this is my community, this is my home. And I think it's something that I'll continue to, think about and marinate on for a long time. You just don't think something like that will ever happen to your hometown. We do a lot of forecasting. We cover major events. We do tornado coverage, storms, anything. And to see that hit home is just, it's indescribable.
I have to say, being around you since then, you do seem a little shell-shocked by it all. I mean, you can just tell that there is this weight on your heart.
Yeah. Just the other day, we went and stopped by some people, and I grew up knowing them the whole lives, the Currys, and they had lost their whole house. The water came up 2-3 feet into their home, and he was a former sheriff's deputy, and his wife has had medical problems over the years. She had surgery right after the flood to take care of some things, and I grew up with their kids. I know their whole family, and that's just one story of hundreds of stories. Sure. In Gibson City. Where it has been different. It has been a big weight on my heart, because the other thing too is while flooding is different. I think if most people walk through town or drive through town now, they'll look around and the houses are still there. Yeah. But the inside of the homes are completely empty. Yeah. They're vacant, they're condemned. And with time too, a tornado comes through. We think back to some of the major tornado events in central Illinois over the last couple of years. Gifford and Taylorville are the two that come to mind. You can go all the way back to the '96 tornado in Urbana. You can see that devastation, but flooding is almost a hidden devastating event where the waters come up and they recede, but they leave behind an incredible mess. The number of homeless in Gibson City is in the dozens. People who have lost everything, and it doesn't quite get the attention that a tornado does or a hurricane, because there's not always as much visible to the surface. Right. The house is still there, but everything inside has been lost.
And once they have cleaned things out, and then we saw the big cranes come through Gibson City and the big equipment, and they bring it out of the town, you still see the structure.
Yeah, the structures are still there. I think the plan is moving forth. There will be some that are destroyed and bulldozed. And when the empty lots pop up, I think that's really going to be a moment where it's very eye-catching. The floodwaters were there for 6 to 12 hours. That was it, and they went down. But the cleanup is going to take months, maybe even years for some families to completely recover. Financial loss is huge in events like this. Yeah. Insurance covers tornadoes and high winds and events like that. Flooding really isn't covered that well. Right. And flood insurance in a place like Gibson City, which isn't on a floodplain, there's not a 1%, the FEMA guidance for 1% floodplain for that kind of coverage. It's really not thought about in a town like Gibson. And so, there's people who have lost all their belongings, and there's nothing they can do.
And belongings that they can't buy again.
You're right about that.
I mean, photo albums and mementos, a man who had his papers from his Purple Heart. Those are the stories we were telling that that's what grabs you.
Yeah, the amazing thing of the event, and I think looking back to that day, and we could talk more about the rescue a little bit later or whenever, it was a miracle that no one died in Gibson City that day. The way the water came up, there's no words that can say besides it was a total act of God that people survived that event. Rescuers were going into houses, and there was a apartment complex which had about a 50% disabled community. Rescuers got in there in the nick of time. The water was up to their necks, and people were stuck in wheelchairs.
Oh my gosh.
It's just unbelievable that no one died from that event, but I think that also is a testament to not only did first responders come in, but those first responders were neighbors, they were friends, they were people who were just right there at the right time, jumping into action, even though their own houses were being impacted by the water, to make sure that no one died. I think that too is another, just a miracle story that comes from Gibson. And there's a lot of stories that have been told, but there'll be a lot of stories that may not be told and are hidden in the town.
And I want to go back. You had told me a story about where you were, and you had this feeling, this premonition, I don't know what you would call it. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I was actually in Nebraska. I had taken a 4-day little mini vacation, was heading out to Nebraska to visit my brother and his wife. They were planning to move from an apartment into a new house. They bought a new house, they settled there, and it was a really exciting time. Long story short, the closing in the house was delayed by a few days, and so my thought was, well, okay, I can sit here for a couple of days and hang out, but there wasn't really much I could do to help them. So I said, it was about Wednesday afternoon, about 4 o'clock, and I had this thought go through my mind. I said, I need to get home. I couldn't tell you how, why, besides, again, I think the Lord just said, time to go.
And you're not looking at a radar thinking,
No.
I got to go home. It was just a feeling you
That
had.
whole week there was an active pattern. We had storms to the north, storms to the east, and really that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we really didn't have a whole lot that happened here in central Illinois, even though each day that pattern was looking very much like something could happen. That's the type of events we usually get in the summer when you get those week-long stormy patterns. And I remember thinking, I think our luck's going to run out, and I don't know why, but I probably could do more back at home helping out at the station than just sitting in Nebraska.
Here.
Yeah, because we were hanging out, we were cooking and eating and having a good time, but something was said, it's time to go. And that moment happened at about 4 o'clock, and within 30 minutes I was packed in on the road. It was the easiest drive back I had ever had from Nebraska, about 10, 11 hours. Drove back, made it here about 2 a.m. When I woke up at about 8 a.m., the first severe thunderstorm warning came out for Ford County, and the storms looked like they were approaching. And it was, yep, okay, I got to go north, and I got to get towards Gibson because that's where the storms are. Headed that way, and then it all began.
And I don't know if we have said it, your dad is the mayor of that town. So you were in that unique position. Like you were saying, some of these rescuers, their own house is flooding, but they have to do their job. It was the same for you. I mean, that day, we were all sitting in the newsroom trying to figure out how we're going to cover this, and we knew you were in the middle of it, but then you also had to worry about your parents' house.
Yeah, you're right about that. So once the rain started, it became very obvious the usual places flooded. That happens when we get heavy rain. But it kept raining, and it didn't stop. And the water kept coming up. And there was a period of time, it was about every hour, I would go out into the community and I'd try and look for video and grab some stories and check in with Dad and what's happening. And there was one moment where I realized this was really bad. And I remember calling Dad because Dad was also out of town helping the other brother move. I called Dad and said, Dad, this is bad. And he said that later he told me he knew how bad it was just because he could hear it in my voice, not being there. He was on his way back. But, how do you know when an event's like this is going to happen? You can't predict that. He said he knew it was bad. And once that happened, I remember I was sitting close to downtown, and there was a period of time where I couldn't get more than about 3 blocks from my house. So I would check back at home, go out, check back at home. And one time when I went back home, it was about 11 o'clock in the morning. The water had come up in the basement. Hadn't had anything yet, but there was about 6 inches in the basement. And I just kind of had this almost panic moment, but I knew, okay, I've got to cover this event. We've got to get the word out. But I also need to do what I can to save Mom and Dad's stuff and trying to find that balance. I remember I texted our assistant news director. I said, send help now.
Yeah.
That was all I could do. The communications went down in town. You had, we were surrounded by water, and they sent help, and they got crews up here. I couldn't get into them, though. The water in the basement, thankfully, I got some things taken care of and got the sump pumps fixed. There was a little problem with them, and the water, thankfully, didn't come any higher up. 6 inches of water at the time, I thought, man, this is so bad for the house. I never remember growing up seeing that. Yeah. But then you would go out and 3 blocks away, people have 4 feet
of water
in their first stories.
Yeah, I've had a basement flood a couple of times. I can't even imagine how you look at that happening to your home. What do you do?
There's one story that really stood out to me. There's a couple in their 80s. They've been in Gibson all their lives. They had a house in town. And I think this tells the story about what happened to a lot of people in town. The water started coming up, and they realized they couldn't get out, and they were trapped. And when the rescuers got to them, they were just sitting at their kitchen table with the water up above their waist, and they were just crying.
Oh, gosh.
They knew they had lost everything. There was no chance that their home was going to be saved. A lot of their belongings they'd had over the years, they're in their 80s. What can they do to recover from an event like this?
They're sitting at their kitchen table watching their home flood.
Yeah, and when the rescuers came in, they got them out. But at that point, what can you do? The water came up so fast, and that's just one story again.
How fast? How many? I mean, give me a time sequence. How many hours did it take?
So the rain started that morning. There were some first showers and storms at about 4:30 in the morning that came on through, and that saturated the ground. The really heavy rain started between about 8 and 9, and by 11 a.m., we knew we were in big trouble in town. Just a couple of hours, if that. And some of these people said the water, they could see it just rising into their homes before their eyes. You think about central Illinois, it's very flat here. It's very unusual to have flooding like this. We've talked to the weather department before about, we'll never have a flash flood event like this. We get some underpasses in Champaign-Urbana. There might be some minor street flooding.
Gibson City isn't next to a lake.
No, we have a small creek in town. When you get 10+ inches in a couple of hours, there's nothing you can do about
There's
that.
nowhere to go.
No infrastructure, no plans, no nothing to prepare for that. You're at the mercy of this storm. Mm-hmm. When that water came up, it came up fast. I actually, interestingly enough, back a couple of years ago in 2020, February 2020, I lived in Mississippi and I lived on the river. And my house then, I lived in a trailer park. My house then flooded. I had to evacuate out of there. And I remember in that event, the river, it moves very quick. The water really rushes on that. And it was just similar to that in town. The water was just rushing on through like a river in town. There were belongings I remember standing at State Street. That was one of the hardest hit neighborhoods, and seeing belongings literally being washed out of the front doors of homes. You think of, you see a tornado and there's 2x4s and debris flying, but you literally see, there goes a table, there goes some chairs, there goes some toys that kids had there.
Yeah.
You just see that running out the front door. And then there's people waiting in the water trying to get to safety with boats going in. A very chaotic scene, but at the same time, I think everyone in those scenes, the rescuers especially, they knew what their mission was and they knew what to do in spite of everything happening around them.
Now that you have been in the middle of it and experienced what you have, does it change perhaps your perspective going forward on how you will report on other weather disasters?
I think every event that you cover does that in a way. I think this one will do it more than most. I think back to some of my earliest events when I was in Mississippi for a couple of years, for 3 years as a meteorologist at the CBS affiliate down in Northeast Mississippi. There were a number of events that I covered where there were tornadoes that came through, and we were one of the first on scenes to homes being swept away, people's livelihoods out. And in that perspective, you're really changed by that because you realize, hey, we've been talking about severe weather all week, and that's the result. Obviously, we don't cause that event, but we're forecasting that, and our forecast affects people's lives. And that's always something that stuck with me. For that event, there was a couple of events like that in Mississippi. I was down in the panhandle of Florida for Hurricane Michael and seeing that devastation. I've seen wildfires and floods across the country. You forecast and talk about those events from the comfort of an air-conditioned studio. Mm-hmm. But those are people's lives that are being affected. And that day, we had known the pattern was active, unsettled, would lead to maybe some locally heavy areas of rainfall. But how do you predict something like this? We can't say there's 100% certainty of 8+ inches of rain in Ismailia. That's just not how our science is able to that's not how the science works for us. But knowing that when the warnings come out, the flash flood warnings, and seeing it unfold before your eyes, it reminds you that people are relying on you for information. They're trusting you to keep them safe. We've had a lot of tornado warnings this year. We've had a lot of flooding this year in central Illinois too. Gibson City, I think, is one of the hardest hit areas, but McLean County's had flooding. Logan County, DeWitt County has all had flooding. There's been areas like that. And those are all people's lives that are being affected. Every number I put, every icon I put, everything I say on air, people are relying on. Yeah, they want to know when it's going to be sunny and then get outside, but they also are coming because they know, hey, this could affect my life and this could affect my day, whether it's severe weather, winter weather, flooding, rain, all of those things impact people. And I think that this event in particular is knowing, I had a conversation with Derek Faber before I came back, and he said, I love forecasting the weather, but there's something about forecasting the weather for people you love that just makes it extra special and extra, just different. And that really stuck with me. I think this event is like,
oh yeah,
that's exactly what it is. I don't love that the event happened, but I think that this is proof why I'm here, why I'm home. People in Gibson, they need a voice, and that's my small part in the equation to help showcase the flooding and make people realize that, hey, this is devastating. You can't see it, but these are people's lives, and the fact that it's people I know, I think is just something will always stick with me.
We have been to Gibson City many times with our towns. That is always a good time. It is a showing. The whole community comes out. I wasn't surprised about how much people were rallying for each other. You just knew that was going to happen. In good times and bad, I mean, Gibson City is going to stick together and help each other. Is there anything, though, that maybe you saw that did surprise you with your hometown?
I'm not surprised the way that people came out together to help each other. That's the way Gibson City is. Gibson City, we help neighbors. Mm-hmm. We're here for our town and for our friends and family. Everyone in Gibson knows everyone, and we're going to do what we can. But even saying that, when you're there in the recovery efforts, Coach Allen, the football coach, and works for this school, I had him in class, and he was one of the first on scene with a boat to get these senior citizens out of these apartments, standing through the water, wading through there. I only learned later that his basement had 4 or 5 feet of water as well. He lost so much from that flood. But even while his house is flooding, he's jumping in to help people in that moment. And then the recovery from the flooding, neighbors helping neighbors, I think that's the only thing we can do in an event like this. So much loss of property, so much loss of personal belongings and things of that. It's again amazing that no one died, but that's what small towns do, and that's what they do in Central Illinois. They come together to help people. So I'm surprised by the amount of damage, even though I was there and I saw it, and it continues to evolve. Where I think the last count was 1.2 million pounds.
Pounds, and then when you also see a dollar amount on it,
yeah,
it's staggering.
It really is. So I'm not surprised how Gibson City came together, but it is surprising to see the devastation because again, you don't expect that in your hometown. You think, oh, you see it on the news, it's somewhere else.
It's a rainstorm.
Yeah.
And it just came up so fast. Well, we are so grateful that you were there, being able to not only help, but give us all the different perspectives. I mean, let me tell you, this guy emails several times a day. Do you know about this? Do you know about this? But I just, it's been so interesting just watching it and watching this town. And the fact that there was a car show 1 week after the flood, it showed you that, we're going to get back on our feet. Yeah, we got to move forward.
There's so many stories of people, helping to recover and make sure that there's time to celebrate what has happened.
Yes.
And we're not celebrating the flood, but we're celebrating
who you
people
are.
Who have who we are as a town and the people who have come to help. The American Legion for a while was doing 700 meals a day. Mm-hmm. You had businesses donating so many items. You had churches coming together, even though some of those churches had flood damage themselves. You had so many stories of
that shelter at the school was put up in, 5 minutes. I mean, all of a sudden there was a shelter at the middle school.
Yeah, things started opening up and happening because people knew, hey, we've got to jump into action and do something. I mean, you can stand there and just look at it, but from the rescue to the recovery, there's people in need, and that's what Gibson City comes together. And I think when you look at the whole thing, that car show, some of the events, the drive-in movie theater, hosting movie nights and things of that, it's a way for people maybe to step back and
take a breath.
And I think that's something that's very important in natural disasters like this.
All right. Well, thank you so much for, hopefully people got a little bit more than we can do in just 2 minutes in a newscast. It was good to be able to sit
You're right
and chat
about that.
it.
And I think, too, one thing about WCIA is, the coverage. I know we would give coverage to any town that's been hit by a disaster like this. We did for Gifford. We did for Taylorville. We did for, Urbana back in the 90s. Ogden, exactly. And I think that speaks volumes about WCI as a station. Is, you know, we care about our communities, and being able to be a part of that is an incredible experience. But being a part of that for my hometown, you know, that's something that doesn't happen to many people. So, you know, there's gonna be a long recovery ahead for Gibson City, but I think there's going to be a lot more good that comes from this than what the flood caused.
And we will be there when we see new homes going up and new construction and people getting their lives back together.
And I think we've got to go get a blizzard, is that right?
Yes. My picture's up at the Dairy
Yeah.
Queen. When they open, I'm going to be there.
Okay.
With a new picture, because that one's old.
A little bit.
That's some bad hair.
That's right.
And shoulder pads.
We'll forgive you.
All right. Thank you, Jacob. And thank you for being here and listening.